has spent his career studying Korea, first with the CIA, rising to the level of Deputy Division Chief for Korea, and now as Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Klingner joins us now from Washington. Welcome, Mr. Klingner. Good to have you here. I hope
Thanks for having me.
I hope you heard some of what we just heard from President Trump, because he said he feels he's terribly well prepared for this summit. He's ready to go. He also, at the end there, if I understood it correctly, it's hard on all the chaos, said 1, 2, 3, referring to possibly how long the summit could go. Is a longer summit better news or worse news?
Well, the important thing is how quickly or how closely the two sides come to resolve really the chasm in the differences over denuclearization. When North Korea issued a series of statements in May, people tended to focus on the insulting or the threatening part. But what was most important is that the first Vice Foreign Minister, Kim Dae-gwan, announced, really reiterated what was long-standing North Korean interpretations, which was quite different from what the White House thought. So the White House was surprised. And I think one of the reasons President Trump is lowering expectations is they came to realize that they weren't as close as they were to achieving a big success.
If there is success in the North Korea summit and they agree to a complete and verifiable denuclearization of the North Korean peninsula, of North Korea, how difficult is this given the scale of Pyongyang's nuclear program and dozens of clandestine nuclear sites as well?
Well, if North Korea legitimately agrees to not only their interpretation of denuclearization, but the UN requirement of CVID, that would be very, very significant. Now, for verifying it, what we would need is, in any agreement with North Korea, to have the more robust verification regimes that we had with the Soviet Union, with the START and the INF and the CFE treaties. So you would need to have data declarations, inspections of declared facilities, and very importantly, what's known as short notice challenge inspections of non-declared facilities. If we don't have those kind of parameters, we don't really have a good agreement.
And the concerns right now in the region, not only by Japan, but also by South Korea, is this growing fear of decoupling, that the U.S. might not uphold its deterrence commitment to Japan and South Korea. How justified are these concerns when you take a look at the moves taken by the U.S. administration?
Well, the President and Secretary of State and others have made comments where they focused only on the ICBM threat to the American homeland. And that makes the allies nervous that we may either not discuss or not include in an agreement the short-range and medium-range missiles, which already carry nuclear warheads and threaten South Korea and Japan. So the reason for Prime Minister Abe's 2 recent trips was really to get the president to publicly affirm again that those kind of missiles will be discussed in any agreement or even discussion between the U.S. and North Korea. So, of course, we have very strong alliances with both countries, and we have a firm commitment to defend both of them against any kind of North Korean provocation or attack.
So, Bruce, help me with what seems to me, at least, the core conflict here. On the one hand, Kim Jong-un wants to make sure he stays in power. That, I think, is his #1 goal, and that means the United States can't kick him out of North Korea. On the other hand, our allies and the United States wants to make sure we maintain our commitments to South Korea and to Japan. How do you square those two things? How do you really reassure Kim Jong-un, at the same time you maintain your military forces over there?
Well, one of the conditions that North Korea has long held is, we have to provide a security assurance. Now, that's not a guarantee that the regime stays in power. It's more of a non-aggression pledge. And actually, the U.S. has provided that many, many times, particularly in the September 2005 six-party talks joint statement, where we pledged not to attack them with conventional or nuclear arms. All to no avail. The North Koreans still walked out of the agreement. So the Americans can pledge not to attack North Korea unless they attack our allies. But one of the reasons why many of us are skeptical that North Korea will actually give up the weapons is, what piece of paper could Donald Trump or any president sign that would provide more assurance to the North Koreans than them holding nuclear weapons? So, especially because we've tried it before. So, it's not a guarantee that Kim gets to stay in power. It simply would be a pledge that the U.S. won't unilaterally attack the North unless they attack first.
Well, and you have to interpret that pledge against at least 2 things. One is what happened in Libya with Muammar Gaddafi, and also what has happened just within the last year with respect to Iran, an agreement we had there. I mean, how much does that undermine a pledge if, in fact, they were inclined to accept it?
Well, on the Iran agreement, a number of folks have said that, well, if we did, and then as we did, pull out of the agreement, well, then North Korea would feel that they couldn't trust the U.S. not to pull out of any subsequent agreement with them. Well, but they're still willing to have the summit and negotiations. So I think that was a factor, a risk that they already factored in because they're still coming to the table. The Libya issue there's two different issues there. One is the 2003 Libyan divestiture of its nuclear weapons program in a very quick way before they got any benefits. And then 8 years later, the overthrow of Gaddafi, which had nothing to do with the nuclear issue. But certainly North Korea sees that issue as linked, and they don't want to go down the path of having their leader overthrown.
Bruce, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has met with policymakers, high-level officials from China, South Korea, Russia, the United States. Basically, all of the 5 members or 4 members of the 6-party talks except Japan. How important is it to include Japan in the North Korea negotiations?
Well, it's very important, and that's one of the reasons why President Bush insisted on a 6-party talks approach rather than what had in the past under the agreed framework in the 1990s, a bilateral approach. At that time, the South Koreans complained that we were negotiating their security above their heads, as they said. So even though U.S. diplomats fully briefed them before and after any meeting with the North Koreans, they felt they needed to be in the room, which is quite legitimate. So when President Bush insisted on a 6-party talks, it was to have also our ally Japan there because they have issues of concern that may be separate from ours. So it's best to have all the countries affected by the North Korean military threat at the table to each, carry their own water, as it were.
So, Bruce, finally, I want to draw upon your expertise as somebody who's really studied both North and South Korea, the Korean Peninsula. You know as much as most people know about what goes on inside North Korea, which is not that much for most of us. What has caused Kim Jong-un to change his path? It's so different from what he had before, what his father had, from his grandfather had. Is this just he's decided to be a visionary, or is there something going on inside of North Korea that's worrying him?
I think there really is a perfect storm of factors. In a way, the hawks, the doves, and the pythons are all claiming credit. The hawks will say it was the threat of U.S. preventive attack, which forced Kim back to the table out of concern. Actually, the threat may have had a bigger impact on the South Korean president than the North Korean. But the doves are saying you're now listening to us after 10 years of ignoring their advocacy for returning to negotiations. The pythons, who say we need to squeeze North Korea through pressure, will say, well, it's only been the last 2 years that we've had sufficient pressure. But also that doesn't take into account that I think Kim is a bit different from his father. If nothing else, he's doing his father's playbook in a more robust, more energetic way. The South Korean President Moon Jae-in is certainly very eager to diffuse tensions, not only between the Koreas, but between Washington and Pyongyang. So I think really all of those factors combined, brought about this change that we saw, certainly compared with the beginning of the year when it seemed like we were on a path to war.
Bruce, thank you so much for that. Bruce Klingner, former CIA Deputy Division Chief for Korea and current Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia at the Heritage Foundation. Coming up, President Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe holding a working lunch at this moment.